asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste everyone. Welcome to the 7th session of Kathopanishad. Despite the rains and everything here, fortunately just before the class the rain stopped. I saw this 2-3 times and we are able to continue by Mother's grace. So today we are going to discuss a few more verses, mantras of this second canto. It's called second canto, but actually it is the Purameka Dashadwara, that portion. We are going to start from mantra number 5, fifth mantra. Please go to the fifth mantra. Na pranena na panena martyo jivati kaschana itarena tu jivanti yasmin neta upashrito. No mortal lives by prana or apana, but all live by something else, due to which these two find asylum. Now, this is a very important point because, for yogis, the entire spiritual life has to do with handling the prana, the vital energy in our system. Thought, emotion, everything is taken as an expression of that vital energy. So once you have prana under control, the vital energy under control, to a great extent, your spiritual life, your inner life is regulated, and there is a way of unfolding awareness by raising prana, pranic energy. So these are all classical yogic techniques. But in this particular mantra, it is so profound. It is telling us that prana or apan, there are 5 manifestations of this prana, 5 types of prana, you can say. So all of these, whatever we are calling vital energy, that is not the final truth about the human being. You can't know the ultimate just by handling and manipulating this energy. This is what they are telling us. Because there is the self behind this energy, due to which this energy is functioning. So, itarena tu jivanti, the very functioning of the prana is due to the presence of consciousness behind it. And this is a very important point to understand. See, in our own system, you can feel vital energy, but you cannot readily feel consciousness, although the conscious experience itself proves there is consciousness. You don't need another proof for that. But still, until we become extremely sensitive, until we are able to get a taste of pure awareness, we have to keep functioning with the pranic energy in us and handling it properly so that we are able to gradually unfold this level of clear awareness, transparent, unalloyed awareness in our own system, in our own mind. So it's a technique, you can say. It's a method to go into these states. But it is important to understand that the self is the ultimate truth, the core truth about our being, and not prana, not the vital energy. So that is why he says no mortal lives by merely by prana or apana or these vital functions, vital airs. But they themselves have their asylum where? In the self, in pure consciousness. It is due to the presence of the self that the vital energy also is functioning. Our whole problem is actually we have learned to identify deeply with body and mind, and with at the most with vital energy. But we don't analyze the conscious experience in the way Vedanta recommends, so that we are not able to come to the state of pure awareness. So that is why they are giving us this truth that no, just know this, that the self is the supreme reality about your own being. And vital energy and all this come afterwards. They are evolutes. They belong to the realm of Prakriti. They are evolutes of consciousness. But your own nature is only pure consciousness, That being there, everything else is functioning as it should be functioning. So this is the verse which is going to give us the understanding. You see, even in the commentary there, very nicely it has been pointed out. Composite things like houses, etc., are not seen to exist in this world unless this existence is brought about by someone for his own benefit who is not part of the assemblage. So also, all of these functions of our vital energies are possible only because there is the presence of the self, which is the ultimate reality of all of these. That is why the self is also called pranasya pranaha. It is the life of the life energy. So, this is the relationship between consciousness and the vital force within us, according to the Upanishad. Hmm? So, let's go to the sixth verse, the sixth mantra. Hantata idam pravakshyami guhyam brahma sanatanam yatha cha maranam prapya atma bhavati Gautama. Well, O Gautama, I shall tell you of this secret, eternal Brahman, and also how the self fares after death. So these are all very important, poignant questions in our experience. Where do we go after death? And what is the nature of this eternal Brahman? Yoni manye prapadyante sharirattvaya dehinaha sthanu manyenu sanyanti yatha karma yatha shrutam. Some souls enter the womb for acquiring bodies, and others follow the motionless in accordance with their work and in conformity with their knowledge. See, they are telling us how is it that the soul moves on. Some souls enter the womb for acquiring bodies, and others follow the motionless. When is it that we get another body? When we have to get a human body itself is a huge effort. When we have sufficient good karma, according to our philosophy, this is what they say. If you have sufficient good karma, then only you acquire a human body. Otherwise, you may acquire the body of the motionless, which means plants or inanimate objects. one may find expression as all these if one doesn't have sufficiently good karma, which means essentially consciousness should have evolved to a certain extent for you to be able to use this instrument, isn't it? A very sophisticated instrument is being given to us provided we are able to use it. Now, the most recent version of the iPhone, if it is given to a little child of 5, oh, but these days children of 5 also can use it. But suppose you give it to an infant of 2 or 3, he doesn't know what to do with it. So that's the problem. Unless you have evolved to a certain extent, you won't be given the human body because you won't know how to use it. And that is why they are telling us, according to your karma and according to your knowledge, according to your evolution, you will be given the human body again, or else you will go into the bodies of the motionless. So you see, consciousness is manifest everywhere, but the instrument varies. Through what does it manifest? Its manifestation through a stone hardly matters, because the stone is inanimate, it can't express consciousness as life. The plant, to a certain extent, it does manifest life, but not as a human being, isn't it? Not as an animal. So the human instrument is where you have peak manifestation of self-awareness. But if we put it down foolishly, some people, they really put down life, they put down consciousness, because the mind is in such erratic states. They don't want to, they put it down through drink and drugs. So this is abuse of the human experience, isn't it? Abuse of the blessing of God. So that is why, according to our karma and according to our knowledge, our evolution, we get bodies. This is an important understanding. If you actually check and see, this body is nothing but a robe which we are wearing, a robe created by your thought, your emotion, your sanskars, your impressions, your memories, and of course your karma. All this contributes to karma. So it is a kind of cloth we are wearing, which is created by all of these. That is why to proceed in spiritual life, it is important to generate high levels of very good karma and intense self-awareness. This is how we proceed in the spiritual life, doing good works and unfolding the level of awareness we are capable of. And if we foolishly put down life just because of our bad habits or not thinking, not understanding the purpose of human life, then we will regress. We will move backward. We are not going to obviously you are not going to get the iPhone again. You won't be given the human experience again because you have devolved from that experience. So essentially, actually, if you see around you, you will see the truth of what they are telling us. To deserve a human body, it requires a certain level of evolution. And even after getting it, a person can devolve rather than evolve further. So a lot of everything, all of this is encompassed in the knowledge we acquire. And this is not bookish knowledge. It is the knowledge you know within yourself, the awareness that you unfold in the first person. This is what is meant by knowledge here. So according to that awareness and according to the karma we have done, we will acquire new bodies. If awareness is minimal, if awareness has not been cultivated, you obviously will get a body where high level awareness is not required. The body of an animal is like that. Just as much as is required for survival, that's all. So you will get that kind of a body. It is exactly according to how we have lived our lives and what we have prepared for. So that is why the prime importance given to karma in all these philosophies and also to spiritual practice, which is what cultures and evolves our awareness. So after this, Yama is going to tell us another secret. You see, all of these verses are very interesting. Ya esha supteshu jagarti kamam kamam purusho nirmimanaha tadeva shukram tad brahma tadeva amritam uchyate tasmin loka shrita sarve tadunatheti kaschana etadvaitat. That Purusha indeed, who keeps awake and goes on creating desirable things even when the senses fall asleep, is pure, and he is Brahman, and he is called the immortal. All the worlds are fixed on him. None can transcend him. This indeed is that. See, when the senses fall asleep, when the mind even falls asleep, still you are there. This is what they are telling you. Your awareness is unflickering. The senses may be shut down. You do it every day actually. When you go to sleep, the senses are shut down. When you dream, the mind, subconscious mind is still active. But in deep sleep, you shut down the mind also. But then you still recorded an experience of deep restfulness, absence of thought activity. So then who recorded it? So they are telling us awareness ever exists. You don't require something else to validate its existence. You just have to, in the waking state, become completely conscious of it. And you will understand awareness is the only continuum in your experience. Everything else rises, falls, rises, falls. It's not permanent. But awareness is ever present, ever existent, never absent. It is what gives continuity to your human experience. And it is the, you can say, the continuum of all, the common denominator of all your experiences. So in so many ways, they are hinting at the presence of pure consciousness within us. That is Brahman, he says. And in that are fixed all the worlds, because your very perception of anything is based on consciousness. Without consciousness, you cannot perceive, because it is through the conscious experience that you perceive. So all worlds are fixed in that Brahman. That is why it is put like that. If you are more interested in this subject, you can watch the talk called Mind and Perception. The video Mind and Perception. It's one of the NRCB IIT videos by me. And there I have extensively dealt with how perception takes place according to science, according to yoga, and according to Vedanta. You cannot miss out the factor of consciousness. The very act of perception is in the first person, isn't it? So who's the first person? In awareness, perception takes place. So that is why all the objects of your perception are riveted or fixed in the self. So you see, they always coming to the same point. Etadvaita, this indeed is that Brahman. You are verily that. Stop mind activity and identification with mind activity, and you will realize it. In your awareness, everything is happening. So again and again, they will come to the same point. You see the next mantra. Agnir yathaiko bhuvanam pravishto rupam rupam pratirupo babhuva ekas tatha sarvabhutantaratma rupam rupam pratirupo bahischa. Just as fire, though one, having entered the world, assumes separate forms in respect of different shapes, similarly, the self inside all beings, though one, assumes a form in respect of each shape, and yet it is outside. See? Even as the same fire, you look at the flames, they are all of different shapes, sizes, but it's fire. So also our conscious experiences appear so different, and it appears like each one of us has separate experiences. We are all different. It appears like that, but only through one consciousness we are all perceiving whatever we are perceiving, knowing whatever we are knowing, understanding, thinking. It's all only through one consciousness. So they are only telling us the basic fundamental unity of existence. There are separate bodies, there are separate minds, there are separate egos. There is no separate consciousness. In one consciousness, all of these shine. See, usually our way of thinking is whatever is inside my skin is me, and whatever is outside my skin is you. It's not me. Let's put it as not me. But actually speaking, if you just observe this, whatever is inside my skin is me, and whatever is outside my skin is not me. The problem is whatever is outside your skin also is perceptible only in your awareness, and your awareness is not limited to your skin. So we have dimensions of being. Only your body is limited to your skin. Even your mind is not limited to your skin, not to speak of your awareness. In your awareness, there is no outside. When you identify only with what is within your skin, then there is an outside and an inside, not otherwise. So it is in awareness that everything is perceived. Awareness is not bound by your skin. So your sense of individuality, actually, it's a colossal illusion. If you see it for what it is, it's really fantastic, the way it deludes us all through life. In fact, when you reflect on it, this is Maya actually. This is how Maya works. It makes you think of yourself as an individual with fixed boundaries. And none of these boundaries have any authenticity about them, because you see the skin itself. Let's take the skin. It's only a semi-permeable membrane, allowing you to take air, water, oxygen, everything that you need from outside, and throw out whatever you don't need. But then it immediately became my skin, and whatever is within my skin is me. So all this nonsense is the creation of our minds. It is not the reality of our experience. Check and see. Just now, please check it just now. The skin is only a semi-permeable membrane, allowing you to exchange what is inside with what is outside. It has nothing to do with me and mine. And the rest is the ignorance of the mind, which starts saying, oh, this is my skin. And then this is how I should keep it. And whatever is inside this is me. This is all the creation of the mind. If you analyze individuality or our sense of identity very clearly, in a very clear state of mind, you will see that it does not exist. We are in dynamic exchange with the external all the time. And the only thing that is permanent about us is our awareness, in which everything is happening. So there is no inside, outside, you, me, there's no such thing. At the most, you can say we are manifesting through a particular instrument. That's all. But this doesn't mean this is me. That's why Sri Ramakrishna summarized it so beautifully. He used to say, me and mine, this much is ignorance. You see, this is the whole summary. Me and mine. As soon as I say me and mine, oh, the whole story starts. The story of our getting trapped and the great illusion of life, it starts. Try to live at least one day without sense of identity. Please try this out. Those of you who are taking this class, try it out for one day to absolutely not refer to yourself and not think of yourself as a body and not identify with anything. And you will see the sheer joy your mind enters into. Because that is the reality of your being. At least one day without the I sense. So many philosophers and thinkers have tried to analyze this, the bare reality of I. Ultimately, it comes only to this, that the I does not exist. I can identify if I want with 1,000 objects, but I should know it is mine, it is made up, it is my doing, it is not the reality of me. So the actual fact of life is you are always aware, rarely identified, unless you want it to be the other way around. Check and see in your own life. Even just now, how identified are you with the body? You're sitting on a sofa, maybe. Did you know you were sitting on a sofa? Until there's some pain or ache somewhere, you don't even recognize that you are in the body. The healthy body forgets itself, and the healthy mind also forgets itself. But awareness, you are always aware. In awareness is experience. So awareness is your fundamental nature. The rest is all made up. That's why whatever is made up needs to be defended, protected. Awareness doesn't need anything of this. So other than awareness, everything else is all the creation of the deluded mind and ego. We may give it high sounding names, but this is all it is. All our titles and epithets and whatever we think ourselves to be. As soon as you think yourself to be something, you're caught. So just going back to our native state of pristine purity and awareness, this is what they are asking for. That's all. Just be as you are. You know, there's that beautiful book by David Godman on Raman Maharshi. Be as you are. Nothing more requires to be done. Instead of trying so hard to be what you're not and spending a whole life defending it, be be what you are. So Mary is all smiles. The next verse also is like this. You see, it's giving the same idea. Vayur yathaiko bhuvanam pravishto rupam rupam pratirupo babhuva Ekasthatha sarvabhutantaratma rupam rupam pratirupo bahishcha. As air, though one, having entered into this world, assumes separate forms in respect of different shapes. Similarly, the self inside all beings, though one, assumes a form in respect of each shape, and yet it is outside. So, like air, just as he gave the example of fire, here he says, even as air can enter and take various shapes, so also is the self. One self, but appears to be so very different in different bodies, in different minds. Hmm? And the way we are identified, you see, it's all our own making. See it point blank for what it is. It's all our own doing. And we are so comfortable with our ignorance actually, because we are so used to thinking of ourselves as this and that we don't mind it. We don't mind the trap. You know, if you live for a long time in a cage, or there's that old story of a Chinese soldier who was in a prison, a dark dungeon actually, for a long time, some 40 years or so. And then when he was released, he couldn't bear the sunlight. He said, no, no, put me back there, otherwise I won't survive. So, somewhat like our condition, you know. No, no, how can I survive without individuality? Vivekananda used to say, we aren't individuals yet. You don't know what you mean by individuality. It has to be analyzed completely to its core and it will reveal the truth. But if there are strong attachments towards becoming, being this and that, and becoming this and that, then you won't come to this truth. So that is why all the disciplines of yoga, you see, emptying mind, culturing awareness, releasing yourself from the trap of identity, they are all meant for this. Once we sufficiently empty the mind, you will see awareness is the only content of whatever you can call being. The rest is all superimposed. It's not my real nature because it keeps changing and it's acquired and it's lost. But awareness is fundamental and permanent and the continuum of all this. So, this is to be discovered by oneself. No matter, you see, you know, Vivekananda used to say, 1 ounce of practice, it's more important than so many, a whole lot of talk and discussion and all this, because you must feel the truth of this in your own system. I'm not saying you should dispense with Shravan, with hearing about it. What I'm saying is, it has to be felt in the first person. This entire research is like that. One little glimpse of this, and you will shake off ignorance by yourself. No book has to tell us that. Who likes to remain bound? Tell me. So, once we understand the nature of human existence, we will shake off our delusions by ourselves. It's because we don't understand the nature of our existence that we are, you know, we seek our security in our identities, which is such a miserable state. Once you seek security in some identity, which is assumed, your whole mind and intellect will only circle around that identity and keep on defending it without scrutinizing it. So, this is called the life of ignorance or delusion. You have assumed yourself to be somebody. So, the importance of being somebody is being pointed out. That's all. And the glory of being just as you are, like a baby when it is just born, and uh, till the age of 1.5, 2 years, the way it is, that kind of freshness and purity and complete detachment from even the body does not hold to be its own. That kind of a childlike, baby like purity is required. Then you are ushered into this naturally. So that's why, you know, the kingdom of heaven is for children, for such innocent, pure minds. So let's go to verse number 11. Suryo yatha sarvalokasya chakshu na lipyate chakshushairbahya doshaihi ekastatha sarvabhutantaratma na lipyate lokadukkhena bahyah. Just as the sun, which is the eye of the whole world, is not tainted by the ocular and external defects, similarly, the self, that is but one in all beings, is not tainted by the sorrows of the world, it being transcendental. It's the only thing which remains untainted. The mind is constantly doing its all its circus and constantly in joy and sorrow and in the dualities of life. That's why you feel the sheer pain of existence. You know, it is called existential sorrow. Even if you have everything in life, there is this pall of sorrow in the heart. It's called existential sorrow because the existence has not expanded to its true being. It is trapped. So that is why he says that the self, that is the only thing which is untainted by the sorrows of the world. When you touch the self, you become free of sorrow. As long as we are only in touch with our minds, well, you know how miserable a state that is. Because no matter how good the mind behaves at times, it's the mind after all. Hmm? It is entirely based on the impressions it has created, it has collected. And the impressions are always in the dual world of good and bad and right and wrong and nice and not so nice. So the contents of your mind, always the content of your mind will have this these dualities are reflected there. It never comes to a standstill. So how much joy can it give you? And to square up with our misery, we connect with other minds. You know, when we can't solve our own problems, we think if we make a few relationships, they will help us solve. But that mind also is in the same state, or even worse, perhaps. See, this is the problem with relationships. You know, many times in where I teach, there the students ask me, tell us the laws of relationships, because you know they are going into so many things. So then I always tell them, see, if as long as you are not completely safe and independent in your within yourself, how dare you go into relationship with another mind which you don't know how it is conditioned, and what it will finally result in, because that mind also is limited. One limited mind trying to extract joy from another limited mind, how will it work? So how miserable can we be? The best thing to do, that is why, is to first of all become as independent as possible and make friends with our own mind, create an inner ambience of complete independence and deep spirituality, deep inner peace, joy, hope, love, knowledge. Then you can go ahead and share all that with whomever you want. But if you yourself are bankrupt, trying to pull in another mind into that, just because I, I am so restless, I need somebody, this is no way to make relationships, isn't it? Hmm? This is the starting point of our miseries, actually. When we try to make a relationship when we ourselves are bankrupt in terms of thought, emotion, awareness, hmm, it won't work. So understanding this is very fundamental. In fact, this should be part of emotional intelligence, although it is not a part at present. Maybe after a century it will come into our whatever academics, but it should be part of our emotional and spiritual intelligence, that there is a way of becoming completely independent of everything and remaining happy by oneself. If I attain to that state fundamentally, then I can readily connect with any mind and contribute positively there. So every relationship will flourish. But no, I am so miserable, so let me pull in another mind in the hope it will make me happy. So all these problems are to be, we have to just dive into yoga to understand how to solve the problem. That's all. Hmm? See, here they are repeatedly telling us one who knows the self remains untouched by the sorrows of the world. As long as we know ourselves to be only the body and the mind, there is no end to our, you know, this constant moving between a little pleasure and then pain, a little joy and then a little sorrow. The dualities will simply engulf our lives, and you can't escape it. So that's why as I always say, in my talks, that people are constantly planning these getaways and holidays. Why? You please analyze the psychology and see. You want to get away from your own mind, actually. It's not about the boss or the colleague or the wife. You want to get away from your own mind. But wherever you go, you take the mind with you, isn't it? So even when you go on your getaway, your holiday, your dream holiday, chances are the same brooding might happen, the same anger and resentment remains because your mind goes with you. So first of all, making friends with our mind, which means you should feel comfortable within yourself. This state has to be got through yoga, through spiritual practice. There is actually speaking no other way, because unless we go, you can only go through the mind, laying those building blocks in the mind, which will give us the very transparent good joys of life, the noble joys of life, creating those impressions which will give us inner strength, bringing stability to the mind under all circumstances. These are all fundamental to a good life. So just trying to fill the life with objects from outside in the hope that they will keep me entertained and engaged positively, this will not work. Learning to handle this equipment well, our senses, mind, emotion, thought, the direction of our will, this is very important. Only after that, the rest. So you see, the next verse also is telling us this idea very profoundly. 12th verse. Eko vashi sarva bhutantaratma ekam rupam bahudhaya karoti tamatmastham yenu pashyanti dhira stesham sukham shashvatam na itaresham. Eternal peace is for those and not for others who are discriminating and who realize in their hearts Him who, being one, the controller and the inner self of all, makes a single form multifarious. So eternal peace belongs to whom? For those who are discriminating and who realize the self, and not for those who only, they are just passing through life, putting down life in various ways, living in deep fear. So fundamentally, they are telling us cultivate self-knowledge. That's the whole point. And then you will see that all this, what appears as multifarious, is the creation of that very self. It's an appearance in that self. And only to such belongs eternal peace, and not to the others. So the next verse actually is the most beautiful one. Please see this in the Kathopanishad. Nityo anityanam chetanas chetananam eko bahunam yo vidadhati kaman tamatmastham yenu pashyanti dhiras tesham shanti shashvati na itaresham. Eternal peace is for those and not for others who are discriminating and who realize in their hearts Him who, being the eternal among the ephemeral, the consciousness among the conscious, alone dispenses the desired objects to many. See, how is He described? How is the self described? Nityo anityanam. He is the eternal one amidst all the temporary things of life. Chetanas achetananam. In all beings who have Chetan, He is the consciousness there. In all living beings, whatever expresses life, What is the source factor of that life? It is consciousness. So it is He alone in all that is Chetan. Eko Bahunam. He is the one in the many. Yo vidadhati kama tamatmastham yenu pashyanti dhiras tesham shanti shashvati. One who knows him to be such, he alone will get eternal peace. He will get true joy and happiness. He will be unmoved by sorrow. He will remain untouched by the modalities of mind. That reflects as the objects and people around us. So he will remain untouched by all this. Otherwise, all the waves and storms of our life, they all begin with our mind. So fundamentally, to touch this unitary being, pure being of the nature of consciousness, which is the very, very nature of existence, to touch this, if you can catch pure awareness in your experience, you will understand what they are trying to say. Because it is self-starting conscious principle in us, is this pure awareness. Because it is self-starting conscious experience, it generates, that's why it's called consciousness. But it is a self-starter. It is that being, state of pure being, which gives us the conscious experience. It is pure consciousness. It is Brahman. This is our real nature. Even right now, here, we are that. And any other identification is through your thought process. Please see this. It is not the existential reality of life. Your thought creates the delusion. Right now, when you're hearing this class, check and see. You are only aware. If you think, no, I am this body, it is through your thought process. If you think, no, I am these thoughts which I am thinking, that also is through your thought process. Your awareness is not through your thought process. Because you are aware, you are thinking. So it is, I think it is Nisargadatta Maharaj who said this. Truth is so close to you that you will never find a way to it. You find a way to something only if it is a little distant from you, isn't it? You are it. How will you find a way to it? You are the consciousness through which you are thinking, experiencing. So how will you find a way to it? You stop the experience and you will find the way to it. If there is a way at all, if you can call it a way. Just turn inward. That's the whole point. To understand this Nityo Anityanam Chetanas Chetananam. It's a very profound verse. Let's complete the other two verses. Tadetaditi manyante anirdeshyam paramam sukham katham no tadvijaniyam kibubhati vibhati va. How shall I know that supreme unspeakable bliss which they realize directly as this? Is it self-effulgent? Does it shine distinctly or does it not? See the questions. How do I know this self? Is it self-effulgent? Does it shine distinctly or does it not? The self is self-luminous by itself, isn't it? You require anything else to validate the existence of consciousness? Tell me. It is only because you are conscious that you validate the existence of anything else. You don't require another thing to validate the existence of consciousness. That is why it is self-luminous, self-effulgent, Swayam Prakash. It ever is. It is never absent. Due to its presence, everything is, you know, in the language of bhakti, they will put it like this: God existing, everything exists. It is by the will of God that everything is happening. So, this is what is being said. Because there is consciousness, everything is happening. It is self luminous, self effulgent by nature, and does not require another thing to reveal that self awareness, isn't it? It reveals, in fact, it reveals everything. Just like how you don't require a torch to reveal the sun. The sun charges your torch. Brahman is so fundamental to our being and existence that we miss it out. In perfect silence and stillness, you understand the truth of awareness. Nothing else is required. No activity of mind is required. No vritti is required. No thought is required. Just be, and you will know. So, generate that level of stillness in the system. Knowledge will, you get ushered into knowledge, into the state of pure awareness. That being there, everything else manifests as it is. This is so clear once you catch the truth of awareness, because that thing is completely sort of excluded from our lives, because our mind is so dense with thoughts that we are searching for God here and there, you know. Really, you're searching for the truth all over. You search for Him in temples, in churches, you search for Him in people, you know. Whenever you have complete faith in somebody, you are searching for the God in that person. You search for Him everywhere. But He is in your own heart. He is that through which you are searching. He is that due to which your search becomes possible. Your mind starts thinking. He is the source of everything. And He is ever present. You have turned your face away from Him. That's the whole problem. Something is present right in front of you, but if you don't turn your face towards that, you will not see it. So this is our whole problem, you know. Our mind has turned away from reality. See, this is how Maya works. The obvious becomes the unobvious. The unobvious becomes obvious. So this state of mind can only be overcome if you generate high level stillness for a long time in your system. You will understand stillness is almost synonymous with awareness. I'm not just talking of stilling the body, stilling the mind, stilling your thoughts, stilling your entire being. And you will understand you are only aware. That is the bare truth about you. The rest is all imposed, it comes later. So you understand perfectly the cause effect relationships between things only when you attain this level of stillness. That is why you see the constant suggestion of meditation and all this in all these philosophies. It's only for that. Meditation techniques, practices, stilling, sadhana, the entire system of yoga, all is meant for this, to discover the reality that ever is. Then let's go to the last verse and we'll take up the questions. न तत्र सूर्यो भाति न चंद्र तारकम नेमा विद्युतो भांति कुतोयम अग्निः तमेव भांतम अनुभाति सर्वम tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. Is an often quoted mantra. This is, you see, there the sun does not shine, neither does the moon nor the stars, nor do these flashes of lightning shine. How can this fire? He shining, all these shine. Through His luster, all these are variously illumined. The sun does not shine there, obviously. Why? Sun gives you physical light. Consciousness is that which reveals light to you, reveals darkness and light, both. Isn't it? That is why they're telling there the sun does not shine, nor the moon, nor the fire. That shining, all of these shine. Please see, how do you know there is light? Who knows there is bright light? When you get up in the morning, you know it's dawn, that the sun is coming up, light is coming. Who knows that? In your awareness, you are seeing that. Your awareness reveals light, it reveals darkness, it reveals the coming of light, the going of light. So, in awareness, you know, in awareness, you perceive, in awareness, you sense. That is why they are telling us that everything shines in that light of awareness. Nothing has luminosity by itself. This shining, everything shines. How beautiful, you see. It's a poetic way of saying you are the fundamental core of existence. You are Brahman. Where are you seeking? You just have to turn the mind inward, disidentify from what you never were, and your true identity will shine forth by itself. Everything shines because there is the light of the self-starting conscious principle right within you. In its light, everything shines, and nothing exists without that. So this is also one of the most profound mantras of Kathopanishad. The self-luminosity of Brahman. Check and see the truth of this in your own experience. When you get up in the morning, first thing, you have become aware. That is why you start perceiving. If you did not become aware, would there be anything to perceive? In your awareness, you perceive. So you are actually, you can say, the source of perception. This idea comes again and again, the self-luminosity of Brahman. It is the only thing which is self-luminous. Everything else, that is why they say, has borrowed existence, because in the light of your awareness, it shines. There is no proof of it being there without your awareness. That is why it is not more real than your awareness. So this is a very profound observation in the Upanishads. That truth, unchanging truth, is Brahman alone. The rest is all borrowed existence, which passes off for existence because we don't analyze or scrutinize it. We don't investigate into it. So Vedanta is all about deep level investigation, turning the mind inward and inquiry, which are. It will take you to the truth. If we are sincere and earnest enough, just the vichar will do. It will take you to the truth. So today let's stop here and we'll take up 2 questions are there. Okay, the first question is, Swamiji has given 4 yogas to practice. However, in meditation practice, how does one make use of the various levels of Jnana Yoga? In deep meditation, it's completely blank. Yet all the reading and sadhana chatushtaya steps, how does one know the relation of scripture and experiential knowledge? How does one assimilate these properly? See, Swamiji has given 4 yogas of practice. Yes, definitely. And we are supposed to harmonize these yogas because we have all these 4 faculties of thought, emotion, will, propensity towards action, all of this, and meditation also. So we are supposed to harmonize these yogas. But there will come a point in your life, in your spiritual life, when you are actually what you want in spiritual life, you start thirsting for it. Each soul is oriented towards a particular aspect of spirituality deeply. This is what you're actually wanting. The bhakta deeply wants the love of God. The Jnani deeply wants to know the nature of the self. So you will orientate yourself towards that naturally as you proceed. And so one of the yogas will dominate in your life. When one of the yogas dominates, you will understand the place of everything else. Essentially, this question can only be understood through practice. What is the relationship between experiential knowledge and scripture? Scripture, at the most, it is meant to confirm what is happening within you. If nothing is happening, there will be nothing to confirm. So then scripture becomes irrelevant. Only if there is sadhana, deep level practice, you will find the scripture utterly relevant, most important. So essentially, dive into sadhana, some technique, some form of prayer. This utter sincerity of spiritual life should come. Then we will understand all of this. Otherwise, only confusion will prevail. Hmm? This is a subject matter not to be known through a rationalizing intellect. It is to be known through sadhana, through prayer, through inner yearning for God. That is the path. So please do something intensely and things fall into place one by one. All our confusions get cleared as you proceed in sadhana. If we are not doing anything, then yes, the mind will keep creating doubts and you sort of get stuck in that. Then the next question is, it's regarding definitions. You see, I feel very confused about Brahman, Atman, Paramatman, Hiranyagarbha, all these. If Mataji, you could kindly explain these terms, it would be good for me. So I would suggest a small book called Hinduism at a Glance by Swami Nirvedananda. I'm sure you get it in your Vedanta societies also. Hinduism at a Glance. So this book will give you all these definitions. Brahman, the supreme reality of consciousness, is called Brahman. Atman is the sort of individualized, localized aspect of it, which you find in the human being. Then Hiranyagarbha, the realm of Sagun Brahman, and Sagun Brahman himself is the same word is used, Hiranyagarbha. So like this, you will find definitions in that book. Read the book, but as I always say, to actually feel the reality of this, you have to do something about it. See, in India, philosophy and psychology, just yesterday we were discussing this, they were not considered two separate subjects for a long time. Because how do you understand philosophy? Through your psychology, isn't it? Through your mind, it's through your mind that you understand. So these two were taken together. That's why I always say Yog Vedant, isn't it? Why do I say Yog Vedant together? You use yoga as a means to Vedanta, as it were. You use your psychology to understand philosophy. In India, they were not considered two separate disciplines. Now they have all become very defined, very separate disciplines academically. But this is how they developed. And unless you have a very stable psychology, no philosophy will work. No understanding will be clear. That is why the preliminary path of yoga, to understand all of this, that whatever Vedanta or the Upanishads are trying to tell us, you can assimilate that knowledge only if the mind is very stable and calm. That's why, for most people, it is irrelevant. Vedanta doesn't make much sense to most people. It's pretty obvious why. Not that Vedanta is obscure or difficult to understand. It's that their minds are unable to take it. If something is moving, it can't catch something that is very still. So the whole point is you use yogic techniques to still the mind, to arrive at a stage of great inner stability, and Vedanta will become pretty clear and very obvious to you. That this is the normal natural path. So you're, in a sense, using psychology to go into philosophy. This is how it was done in India. I think time is up. We will say our customary prayer and finish today's class. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhidaha, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukha Bhaga Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We'll have our last class next week. Namaste and thank you.